a bloody cannibal! Yeah,
Sir, remove those men from the court.
Carrot! Scab protect! That's what they are! Scab protect! Get out! Scab protect! Eyes to drink! Scab protect!
Enough police outside to start a riot.
Could have done without that little demonstration as well. That sort of thing could have a bad effect upon the jury.
Members of the jury, Peter Malloy stands indicted on a number of charges, including conspiracy to intimidate men to stop work, fighting, causing an affray, unlawful assembly, and causing an explosion of a nature likely to cause injury to property. To this indictment, he has pleaded not guilty, and it is your charge to say, having heard the evidence, whether he...
Yeah, I'm going to, but it won't stop them using it. Perhaps we could knock its credibility.
Unless you have a word with Kelly, get him to drop it, eh?
About what?
Blood, members of the jury. Because of the publicity surrounding this case, as evidenced by the demonstration we've all just witnessed here this morning...
Can I say something, Mr.
No,
Chairman?
you cannot, Mr. Malloy.
I just want to say I've nothing to do with just what's happened.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Malloy. That's very commendable. I'm glad to hear you say that.
Smart. More ways of killing a cat than choking it with cream.
In February 1974, Malloy was dismissed by his employer's Gillis Construction Company for masquerading under an assumed name.
An assumed name?
Yes, my lad, it appears that he frequently used various aliases from time to time in order to obtain employment.
They keep a blacklist. I was getting victimised.
Thank you.
Thank you, my lad. For some period following his dismissal, Malloy very naturally found it difficult to find work. And it was during this time that he organised an action committee among building workers who, led by Malloy, disrupted production and terrorised workers who refused to take part in unofficial action. I think I should point out, my lad, and members of the jury, that at no time did the unions either support or endorse his action. On the contrary, responsible trade union officials publicly denounced the action committee. The main targets for this mafia-type organisation seem to have been Malloy's ex-employers, Gillis Construction Company. And when the moderates there refused to have anything to do with the action committee, they picketed the site. And on July 17th, Malloy led and encouraged his pickets to invade the site and physically assault and intimidate the workers employed there. The police were called in, but at that time, no arrests were made. However, later on in September, Malloy was arrested and charged with incidents with charges arising out of that incident.
Can you tell the court why, after a lapse of some 3 months, this decision was taken?
Yes, my lord. Papers were sent to the Director of Public Prosecutions by the police following protests by moderate individual trade unionists who feared reprisals, and by building trade employers who, in fact, had built up an entire dossier of violence throughout the period that Malloy and his colleagues were touring building sites intimidating workers.
I see. Thank you. Carry on.
Subsequently, on September the 25th, Malloy and 4 others were arrested and charged. Now, it would appear, members of the jury, that unlike the other 4 who pleaded guilty and have been dealt with, Malloy actually seemed to enjoy the publicity and the notoriety he was receiving. And far from expressing any feelings of guilt or remorse for his actions, he actually addressed meetings up and down the country, attacking the employers and the unions, and actually encouraging other extremists to form similar rank-and-file action committees. Finally, a bomb explodes on the motorway site of Gillis Construction Company. And as a result of their inquiries, the police arrested Malloy and charged him with the offence. I call George Scott. Yes.
George Scott.
Is it about?
Well, I imagine it must be about the transcript.
Oh, really? Look, listen to what he's got to say, but whatever happens, we're using the transcript.
Okay.
Don't let him intimidate you.
Yeah, right. Here you're George.
You've got the transcript.
What is your religion?
Roman Catholic.
Take the book in your right hand. Read what is on the card.
Swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are George Scott of 17 Kirkdale Drive, Fulchester?
Yeah,
And you run a private inquiry agency.
yeah.
Do you know the accused, Peter Malloy?
I do, yeah.
Will you tell the court when and how you came to meet him?
First met him in February of last year at a meeting called by the trade union in support of those pickets who'd been arrested during the Gillis building site dispute.
Now, look, about this laundered transcript you're going to produce.
What do you mean laundered? It's a verbatim transcript.
Yeah, come on, look, the police, you know, they can chop about with it, nuances of the voice, all these distortion.
Surely you're not accusing the police of that, are you?
Depends how much they want a conviction.
Then you must challenge it.
I will, but that's when the shit'll start to fly. Neither of us need that, do we?
Robbie, if you want to start mudslinging, then it's up to you. But it's no deal. Richard says the transcript stays.
Right.
Now, will you tell the court, Mr. Scott, how your investigations proceeded? In what manner your investigation continued after this, once you had made the acquaintance of the accused, once you'd got to know him?
Well, after I'd gained the confidence of Malloy and the others, I was invited to attend a meeting at Malloy's house where it was proposed by Malloy that a flying column of pickets be organised to visit certain selected sites in an effort to drive out those workers employed on the lump.
Whilst most of us are familiar by now with what the lump means, I think the time has come for the jury to have a definition.
It refers to self-employed men who hire themselves out as labour-only subcontractors, my lord.
Unorganised and scab labouring means.
Thank you.
And so, Mr. Scott, this flying column was duly set up, headed by the very man who had proposed it.
Yeah, but controlled by the Building Workers Action Committee.
Which here again, Malloy was mainly instrumental in organising.
Oh, yeah.
And at this meeting, Mr. Scott, was there any discussion as to how they intended to achieve their ends?
You mean for getting rid of the men on the lump?
Yes, was there any talk of them using violence?
Not in so many words, no, but the tone and mood of the meeting suggested that everyone there expected that violence would be used.
My lord, it's not for the witness to interpret the mood of that meeting.
Quite right, Mr. Griffiths. Please confine your remarks to what happened, what you actually saw and heard.
Sorry, my lord.
So you were an accepted figure on this action committee?
Yeah.
And were you present when the pickets, led by Malloy, visited the Gillis site on July 17th?
Yeah, I was.
Tell the court what happened.
Well, about 120 pickets turned up, and Malloy had a loudspeaker fixed on the top of his van to address the workers on the site. He told them that if they didn't stop work and leave the job immediately, they'd all be taken care of.
Taken care of? Were those his exact words?
Yeah. He even had the list of fellas' names. He read them out, said he knew where they lived and what pubs they drank in. Then when the men ignored what he was saying to them, he lined his pickets up, marched them onto the site, pushing over scaffolding, pushing down piles of bricks, that sort of thing. The manager of the site came over, he told him to clear out. Malloy said he wasn't leaving until the men on the lump left as well, and then a scuffle broke out, and I actually saw Malloy pick up a shovel and threaten a ganger with it. And then the police arrived and broke it all up.
Now, Mr. Scott, you were a member of this action committee. You attended their meetings. You developed close relationships with those involved, and with Malloy in particular.
Yeah.
Even to the extent of staying at his home on occasion.
Yeah, I slept there 4 times.
And it was while you were staying at his home that you decided to tap his phone.
Yeah.
Why was that? I mean, if you were already close to Malloy and had access to what was going on, why did you think it necessary to tap his phone?
Well, he had contacts all over the country. It's part of my job to keep as much information as possible.
Mm-hmm. And the actual recordings of these telephone conversations, what did you do with them?
Handed them over to the police.
My lord, I would like here to introduce into evidence as Exhibit 1 a transcript of one such recording.
My lord, I must object on the grounds that this transcript is of an alleged conversation that was tapped without warrant. And I suggest it would be a breach of parliamentary undertaking if the police were allowed to use it as evidence.
Yes, Mr. Griffiths, anticipating your objection, I've given this matter very careful consideration. And my decision is that it is perfectly correct for the prosecution to introduce it as evidence. Now, the Crown's undertaking applies to its own servants only. Therefore, however distasteful this practice may be, that is the position. With regard to whether or not Mr. Scott had a commission to commit this intrusion, or rather had a warrant to commit this intrusion, well, the law plainly states that a private person, if he is caught tapping a telephone, then the General Post Office may take proceedings against him under the Post Office Act. But if the Post Office fails to do so, then the person whose telephone is tapped cannot prosecute because he has no right of property in the telephone.
Thank you, my lord. Is this the transcript of one such telephone conversation that you recorded and handed over to the police?
Yeah.
And will you tell the court on what date that particular conversation took place?
November 29th.
You're sure of that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I kept regular notes of everything that happened.
November 29th. Just 5 days before that bomb goes off, Malloy makes a telephone call to someone with an Irish accent in Liverpool, whose identity the accused refused to reveal. And while the person on the other end of the line doesn't say very much, it's obvious from reading this transcript that he had access to the explosives that were used. He says to Malloy, "The stuff is available and waiting." Whereupon Malloy replies, and here I quote direct from the transcript, "We must use whatever means are available to achieve our ends. Maybe we've been too soft with them. They've cottoned on to the picketing lark, and that's played out now. So now we have to come up with something that'll make them sit up and take notice. Let's stop playing games and fight fire with fire. I'm prepared to take whatever steps are necessary to close the Gillis site." 5 days later, a bomb goes off on the very site referred to in that telephone conversation. The explosion occurred at 11:30 p.m. And the accused's van was recognized by 2 policemen leaving the site in a panda car.
Well, what's that supposed to mean? Is that a question or a comment?
I think you should be a little more careful, Mr. Kelly.
I'm sorry, my lad. Now, Mr. Scott, you stated in your evidence to the police that on the very night this particular telephone conversation took place, Malloy actually talked to you about explosives. Is that correct?
Yeah.
He even boasted to you how simple it would be to make a bomb.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, he's quite an expert. He was in the bomb disposal during the war. He often talked about his experiences.
So, technically, he would be more than capable of assembling a bomb similar to that was used on December the 4th.
Oh, very much so, certainly. I remember that on the night in question, immediately after that telephone conversation, he came back into the kitchen, he sat down at the table, he drew a diagram for me, showing me how it was possible to make a bomb. He said, "It's dead easy. All you need is an alarm clock, a watch, bit of wire, a battery."
Yes, but in reference to what? I mean, did you get the impression that this was purely an academic exercise, part of his general obsession with explosives?
Well, I wasn't too sure at the time, but then when I heard the tapes of the conversation the next morning, that got me worried. I began to think then perhaps he was planning something, yeah.
Like what?
Well, like planting the bomb.
So what did you do?
I went to the police, handed them the tapes, told them what I thought.
And did you see him again before December the 4th?
Yes, I saw him twice. The next time was on December the 2nd at a meeting called at his house to discuss the possibility of raising funds for those pickets who'd been jailed during the dispute. Various methods were suggested, like going around the building sites collecting money, appeals to the trades unions, but this time it was different. You see, whereas before Malloy had always been worried about the lack of response and anxious that the committee wouldn't be able to raise the necessary cash, this time he was dead confident. He told the meeting that a political sympathizer outside the industry had guaranteed a substantial amount of money, and that this same source would put up the money for a rank-and-file paper, which was a project the committee had been trying to get off the ground for a long time. And then he told the committee that whether or not this source would put up the money depended completely upon how serious and effective in its actions the committee were.
And did he reveal the name of this mysterious political sympathizer?
No, he did not.
Didn't anybody ask?
Yes, I did, but he was very vague, very evasive about it. He told the committee he'd let them know later. One fella even asked him if we were being funded by a political organisation.
And what was his reply?
Oh, same as before. He wouldn't talk about it. Very quiet about it.
And the last time you saw him was on the 3rd, I believe.
Yeah, the next day, all this talk about bombs. That telephone conversation, the diagrams and so on, and then suddenly this unknown source offering huge sums of money on condition that the committee were more effective in its actions. Well, that had me worried. And I thought I'd better try and find out what's happening, and the police had asked me to keep my ear to the ground, as it were, you know.
And where did you meet him? At his home again?
No, at the House of Plenty, as Malloy called it.
House of Plenty.
Moss Brothers, UAB.
Social Security. The Dole, my lord. Well, it was payday that day, so me and Malloy, we went for a glass of beer, and I tried to open him up, get him talking about his plans, but he was like a clam, wouldn't say a word. And I asked him as well which sites we were going to hit next, but nothing. Wouldn't say a dicky bird about it. That was the last time I saw him.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Now, Mr. Scott, how long have you been one of these inquiry agents?
3 years.
And before that?
I was on the force.
What, CID?
Yeah.
And how many men do you employ?
I employ 4 full-time agents and 1 or 2 casuals who work for me from time to time.
And they're all ex-policemen as well, eh?
Yeah.
That's coming very useful. Tell me, how does a inquiry agency get started? I mean, I appreciate with your qualifications and police background, you've got all the necessary advantages, but does one have to take an examination or a test?
No, but there are certain standards you're expected to live up to.
And who determines them?
Well, I can only speak for my agency, where the men I employ are very carefully vetted.
By you?
Yeah, but as I say, they're all ex-policemen.
Oh, and therefore beyond reproach?
I would think so, yeah.
Might I ask what you are attempting to establish by this line of questioning, Mr. Griffiths?
My lord, the world of the private detective is, by its very nature, furtive, secretive. I'd even go so far as to say questionable. Now, the prosecution has put great emphasis upon this man's testimony, and I think it's to the jury's advantage that they hear a little more about his work.
Well, Mr. Griffiths, but will you please try to get to the point?
My lord. Now, how would you describe your work, Mr. Scott?
Well, I suppose we provide a service, yeah?
Yeah, well, come on, give us some examples.
Well, it covers such a wide field, doesn't it? Debt collecting, matrimonial investigation, credit investigation, writ serving, repossession, you know.
Industrial espionage.
Oh, yeah, that as well.
That's not quite all, is it, Mr. Scott? There are aspects of your agency that I find rather repugnant. I've got here a list of services you offer to prospective clients at a price. Traffic offence records, £20. Bank balances, full details, £16. Ex-directory telephone numbers obtainable for the sum of 14. Details of criminal records. It's quite a shopping list, Mr. Scott.
Well, we supply a demand, you know.
Yeah, of course. What intrigues me is how you get hold of all this highly classified stuff. I mean, how do you manage it? Is it because, as an ex-policeman, you might have friends on the force who are prepared at a price to supply you with this highly classified information, the old PALS Act?
My lord, I must protest.
I think we should all protest, Mr. Kelly. Supplying police records contravenes the Official Secrets Act.
But that is not the concern of this court, Mr. Griffiths. How the witness acquires his information may well be subject to scrutiny and inquiry by others, but that is not why we are here.
Very well, my lord. Now, who employs you to spy upon that Workers' Action Committee?
You must answer the question, Mr. Scott.
Colonel Jackson.
Is that the same Colonel Jackson that is the leader of an organisation which calls itself OMS?
Yeah.
And what was he paying you?
The fee was £50 a day, plus expenses.
In return for what?
Detailed reports on the activities of the Action Committee.
And you've done this sort of work before, have you?
Keeping surveillance on subversive organisations is one of the things we offer our customers.
But
yes,
a trade union rank-and-file committee can hardly be described to as subversive.
Ah, yeah, not in any legal sense, but potentially...
Some people might regard Colonel Jackson's organisation as potentially subversive.
Well, I suppose that depends on what political views you hold, doesn't it?
Well, what are your politics, Mr. Scott?
The jury will disregard that question.
My lord. Now, how many of these agencies are there?
I don't know, do I?
Well, 5,000, 10,000...
Look, I told you, I don't know, do I?
Are you a member of the Association of British Investigators?
No.
Or the British Private Detectives Association?
No.
So membership of either of these professions is entirely voluntary, eh? There's no compulsion for anybody in your profession to join either?
No.
So what that amounts to is that anybody can get hold of a plate, fancy-looking diploma, and call himself a private detective, even an ex-convict.
Oh, in theory, yes, but
and
not
in practice, Mr. Scott, you've just said membership of those two bodies is entirely voluntary. Anyone can become a private detective. It's wide open. And I would suggest that some might be prepared to fabricate evidence in order to gain a fee. In fact, there are cases on record of private inquiry agents being charged with this offence and being committed.
Ah, well, you always get a few black sheep any profession, don't you?
Very true, Mr. Scott. But we're talking about a highly organised secret force that's not subject to the democratic process, like supplying police records, tapping people's telephones. Now, you say you met the defendant in February last year. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Where you posed as a building worker at a meeting.
Yeah.
And then you became an active member of the committee.
Yeah.
Which means, Mr. Scott, in order to carry out this deception, you must have played the role of a militant extremely well. I mean, all this picketing, collecting money, making speeches, generally contributing to the work of that committee.
Yeah, it was necessary.
And the defendant asked you into his home because you were posing as an unemployed worker. He offered you free meals, provided you with accommodation. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And all that time, you're making out your nasty little reports to Colonel Jackson, tapping his telephone. Doesn't that bother you, Mr. Scott?
You Judas.
Yeah. To some extent it did, but it's all part of the job, innit?
What, like putting a bug in his telephone?
Somebody's got to do it.
Would you say the defendant was a violent man?
Violent? No, not in any personal sense. I think his extreme views are violent, yes. But as an individual, no. In fact, I quite grew to like him.
Drop dead, worm.
I still do like you, Peter.
All right, thank you, Mr.
The
Scott.
witness may stand down.
I call Detective Sergeant Evans.
Who's going to hammer that Colonel?
The jury in this case is composed of members of the general public. The Queen against Malloy will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court. Peter Malloy, an unemployed building worker, has been charged with conspiring to intimidate men to stop work, fighting and causing an affray, and conspiring with a person or persons unknown to cause an explosion.
I call Detective Sergeant Evans.
The prosecuting counsel has just called Detective Sergeant Evans to give evidence against the accused.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Detective Sergeant Evans, Special Branch attached to Fulchester Police.
Detective Sergeant Evans, you are a member of Special Branch, are you not?
Yes, sir.
And in the course of your duties, you attended a meeting in a public house called the Roebuck on November the 18th.
Yes, sir.
And did you see the accused at that meeting?
Yes, sir, he was the speaker.
Would you please tell the court, Sergeant, what happened at that meeting and what was said?
Well, the meeting was called by the Building Workers' Action Committee, and there were several items on the agenda. How to raise money for Malloy's defense, the launching of a new rank-and-file paper, the question of what to do about fighting the lump.
Yes, but can you specifically remember what was said by the accused at that meeting, Sergeant?
Yes, sir. He told the meeting that his arrest and trial was a political act committed by a government acting against the welfare and interests of the working class, and that the real issue involved was the right to picket. He said that there existed a conspiracy between the establishment, the police, and the judiciary to bully and intimidate the workers into submission. The right to work, he said, must be spearheaded by the right to protect jobs, the right to picket, occupy factories, do everything possible to bring down the government and end the persecution of trade union militants.
Bring down the government. Were these his actual words?
Yes, sir.
And did he explain how this would be done?
No, except that he went on to say that what was needed was the revolutionary mobilization of the working classes, led by a leadership prepared to go to any lengths to destroy capitalism.
You liar, I can't even think like that.
I recall that one delegate suggested that they should appeal to Michael Foot and Wedgwood Ben, but Malloy dismissed them as being tame pussycats. He said some people only exist to draw the teeth of the working class and lead them to the knacker's yard.
Said right.
Another thing he called them was sheep in sheep's clothing. In all, there were about 100 people attended the meeting. Some of them come from Liverpool and some of them from
Sergeant,
Manchester.
did you attend any other meetings?
No, sir.
But you were keeping an eye on the accused, though?
No more than usual, sir. We always like to keep tabs on this type of organization, and Malloy had been known to us for some time. Plus the fact that with the cooperation of the previous witness, Mr. Scott, we were already pretty well informed anyway.
Now, can we come to the night of the explosion, Sergeant, December the 4th? You were the arresting officer, were you not?
I was.
Can you please tell the court what happened?
Well, I was on duty that night, and at approximately 11:50 went to the scene of the explosion following a report from one of the panda cars that Malloy had been seen driving away from the site where the explosion occurred. After talking to the officers, I drove to Malloy's house, but he was out. When I questioned his wife, she said that he'd gone to the pub earlier on, and she hadn't seen him since.
At what time was this?
About 12:17, my lord.
And how far from the defendant's house is this motorway site?
About 5 miles, my lord, 6 at the most.
I see. Thank you.
So then, what did you do?
I waited in my car outside his house, and exactly 12:40 he drove up in his van.
What state was he in? Was he excited, on edge? Frightened? Was he drunk?
My lord, Mr. Kelly's leading the witness.
I agree with you, Mr. Griffith. Mr. Kelly, will you please allow this witness to decide for himself?
I'm sorry, my lord.
It was my impression that he'd had a few drinks, but he certainly wasn't drunk. He did appear nervous and apprehensive when he saw me, but that's the usual reaction. They all do.
Now, the pub's closed at 11, and it was now 12:40. Did he say where he'd been?
Yes, sir. I told him what had happened, and after cautioning him, asked him where he'd been that night. He said he'd spent 2 hours alone drinking in the Angel Hotel on Butler Street, and after leaving the pub at about 11:15, had bought some fish and chips at a supper bar on Wood Street, ate them in his van, then gone for a drive because he felt restless.
On a cold, freezing December night. Did he say where he drove to?
Holland, sir, at the back of the estate. Claims he parked his van near the canal there, stayed for about half an hour, and then drove home.
Did he meet anybody who could substantiate all this?
Apparently not. I noticed that there were traces of mud and clay on the wheels and tires of his van, and that his shoes also bore traces of wet clay. When I asked him to accompany me to the station for further questioning, he said, "It wasn't me, I know that you think it was, but honest, I had nothing to do with it." Later, as we were driving to the station in my car, he suddenly became very agitated and emotional. He said, "The bosses have got it all sewn up. They've got everything on their side, including the police, whereas the only capital we've got is our own strength. We must fight fire with fire, regardless of the consequences."
You fake it. I mean, where'd you get it from?
Mr. Malloy.
He's lying. It's all
Now,
lies.
Mr. Malloy, your counsel will have ample opportunity to cross-examine this witness. In the meantime, I must ask you in your own interest to refrain from these sudden outbursts. Now, do you understand? Very well, carry on, Mr. Evans.
The samples of the clay taken from his shoes and the wheels and tires of the van corresponded with the type of clay found on the site where the explosion occurred. The accused was later charged with the offense and taken into custody.
Thank you, Sergeant Evans.
Now, Sergeant Evans, these two officers that were in the Panda car that claim they identified the defendant driving away from the scene of the explosion in his van. Now, surely that must have been a bit difficult. Now, given that it was 11:30 at night, and that particular stretch of the motorway isn't well lit, is it?
There are lights there.
Yes, Sergeant Evans, but come on. I mean, imagine the scene. The Panda car's racing to the building site. They pass a blue van coming in the opposite direction. They're probably doing 30, more likely more. And these two officers can positively identify the driver of that van as the defendant, Mr. Malloy. Why, don't you think that's stretching things a bit?
No, sir. It was the van they recognized.
Well, of course, that's a different kettle of fish altogether, isn't it? All they saw was a blue van. There must be thousands of those on the road, don't you think?
I suppose so, yes.
You don't have to suppose anything, Sergeant. I assure you there are. Now, this clay on the wheels. Now, isn't it that clay could come from any sort of piece of ground or garden from these parts?
Yes, but this particular van had been under police surveillance, and the officers in question had seen the van many times at demonstrations.
Yeah, now this is something else that does puzzle me. Here we have the defendant, a well-known trade union militant who, according to the prosecution, spends most of his time going around building sites, threatening workers with violence. A man so important that a member of the special branch, such as yourself, actually found it necessary to attend one of his meetings. And as you've just said, he was under continual police surveillance, and the witness, Scott, was a paid informer, actually infiltrated himself onto the working committee and supplied you with information. And not only that, gave you transcripts of telephone conversations tapped in the defendant's house, which, if we are to accept the prosecution's view, from these transcripts, the defendant was actually plotting to start some bombing mission. And if we are to believe Mr. Scott, he expressed his fears to the police. And yet, you were there all that time. This is what puzzles me. After all that surveillance, my client is able to obtain explosives, presumably from his unknown friend in Liverpool, whose identity remains a mystery.
We are still pursuing
Nevertheless,
our inquiries.
Sergeant Evans, nevertheless, under the noses of the police, he's able to obtain explosives, make a bomb, spend half the evening drinking in a public house, drive his all too easily recognisable blue van to the building site, set the bomb off and get away with it. Oh, Sergeant Evans, I think the jury might find that all a little difficult to swallow. Now, you say that Scott gave you those transcripts of the telephone conversations 3 months before the explosion. Why wasn't his house searched? Immediately Scott informed you of his fears.
Because of the publicity already surrounding the case, we had to be sure. This is a very highly sensitive area.
What is?
Trade union politics. Now, had we gone barging in there with a search warrant and found nothing, we would probably have been accused of harassing Malloy. There would be a public outcry. This is one of the problems that we come up against in attempting to monitor the activities of subversive groups and organizations.
Here again we have this ludicrous word subversive, used to describe a perfectly legitimate trade union rank-and-file committee.
My lord, may I point out to my learned friends that a witness has already testified that a large sum of money was promised to Malloy by an unknown donor, whose identity the accused refused to reveal even to other members of the committee.
That still doesn't prove that this committee was a subversive organisation. People contribute money to a variety of organisations for various reasons. The witness that the prosecution claims himself was a paid informer whose employer remained discreetly in the background. However, I do accept that the special branch is a political police force whose task it is to gather information on acts of terrorism and espionage against the state. But where on earth the trade union movement comes into this pattern, I really don't know. Perhaps the dragnet is a lot wider than we care to imagine. Well, Sergeant Evans, I was very impressed with your detailed report of what the defendant said at that meeting. First-class performance. You must be very clever at shorthand. Is that part of your training?
No.
But you said he spoke for over an hour.
That's right, he did.
What on earth did you do? Sit there surrounded by 100 delegates, take it all down in longhand?
No.
Would have looked a bit silly, eh? Not to say suspicious.
I wrote down my notes on the meeting afterwards.
Well, how long did the meeting last? Surely there was discussions after, wasn't there?
The meeting lasted about 2 hours.
2 hours, and then you dashed off and made up your notes?
Yes.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Sergeant Evans, I got the distinct impression, and I'm sure the jury did as well, that those words you were speaking were the actual words the defendant used. I mean, it was as if he was speaking them himself. And I put it to you, Sergeant, it is absolutely impossible for anybody not trained in shorthand to take down a speech which lasted over an hour and report that speech verbatim.
I'm sure the jury will also have noticed the fact that not once while the sergeant was giving evidence did he find it necessary to consult his notes.
Well, knowing that he'd be subject to cross-examination, that's hardly surprising, Mr. Kelly. What it amounts to, Sergeant, is that you selected the relevant parts from that speech. Is that correct?
Yes. But I'm trained to do that.
Exactly.
Yes, indeed you are. But the jury don't have to accept your political evaluations or judgments. There might have been parts of that speech the jury would consider important. Oh, now look, one of the charges against the defendant is that he's conspired with others to visit building sites and persuade men to stop working. Now, isn't it a fact that all these plans were openly discussed at that meeting you attended?
Yes.
Well, then why didn't you warn them? You might be breaking the law. I mean, there's been plenty of occasions when the police have broken up these Labour meetings with the reasonable likelihood that a breach of the peace might be committed. Yet you sit there, a member of a special branch, listening to men making seditious speeches and plotting, organising things. They're all going to break the law, and you do nothing. Oh, Sergeant Evans. I mean, were you invited to the meeting?
No.
But if challenged, you could easily have said you gained entry because you thought a breach of the peace might be committed. That's the usual procedure, is it not?
Yes, it is the procedure.
No more questions. I call Mr. Peter Malloy.
What is your religion?
I've got none.
Let him affirm.
Read what is on this card.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Now, you're Mr. Peter Malloy of Victoria Towers, Liverpool 8.
Yes.
And how old are you?
58.
And how long have you been associated with the Labour movement?
Well, I was reading on it. I mean, back home in Liverpool, as a kid, I used to go around canvassing with my dad.
Yeah, I mean actively involved.
Well, I joined the Communist Party when I come out of the army in 1946.
And are you still a member of that party?
Now, Mr. Griffiths, this court has nothing whatever to do with politics, and I wonder whether, in the interests of your client, it's necessary for us to know what his political beliefs are.
I think it is, my lord. The prosecution has attempted to discredit my client by making sinister and vague remarks about his politics. I think it to the benefit of the jury that we clear the air a bit.
Our committee was out in the open and I've got nothing to hide.
Oh, very well, Mr. Griffiths.
Thank you, my lord. Now, are you still a member of that party?
No, I left after Hungary.
What, 56?
Yeah, then I joined the Labour Party, but I campaigned for the retention of Clause 4 and for banning the H-bomb. I attacked Hugh Gateskill and I got expelled in 1962.
And are you now, or have you ever been since your expulsion from the Labour Party, been associated with what is commonly known as the far left?
Not in any organised way, no.
Why not?
Well, once bit, twice shy. And anyway, they seem to spend best part of their time slanging each other anyway.
So, since 1962, you've confined your activities to working inside the trade union movement?
That's right.
Now, let's talk about this meeting, the one you spoke at. Now, did you realise, or were you aware, that by selecting sites that you and your colleagues would visit and persuade workers to stop, and you were going to picket the sites, that you were in fact breaking the law?
No.
And yet that's what you're charged with, conspiring with others
I don't know anything about any conspiracy laws, neither did any good lads either. I mean, I'm still trying to fathom out what we've done wrong.
I can assure you, Mr. Malloy, any confusion you have regarding the laws of conspiracy is shared by many members of the legal profession. However, let us continue. Now, you heard the Special Branch Sergeant give evidence about what you're supposed to have said at that meeting.
Could I cut in here? He said words and things that I would never say.
What, such as?
Well, that part about the need to mobilise, to revolutionarily mobilise the working class. I mean, I'd never say that in a month of Sundays. I mean, we had to go at Jenkins and Foot and Wedgie Benji. But I mean, most of the time we were discussing about site conditions and the right to picket.
And then what about this actual picketing of the site on July 17th? The witness, Scott, claims he saw you pick up a shovel and threaten a ganger with it.
He didn't tell you that the gang had come at me like a mad bull with a bit of 3B3 with nails stuck on the end of it. I mean, but he wouldn't. And that's what he's paid to do, isn't it? I mean, he gets his wages, worms his way into our confidence. I mean, he's got to do something to come up for his 30 pieces of silver.
And what about the night of the telephone conversation?
And another thing I want to say too.
Yes?
The newspapers and the press, they've gone out the way to say that we went to that site, hell-bent to kick up in trouble. And that's a load of nonsense. You can't bully workers into agreeing with you. I mean, before the commotion started, we were just explaining to the lads how the gaffer was using a lump to break every safety rule in the book and destroy trade unions on the job. Mind, we didn't have much joy because we'd be well brainwashed by the goons who run the lump for the boss.
And did you plant that bomb?
No.
What about this telephone call you're supposed to have made, the highly emotive words you're alleged to have said? Let's stop playing games, fight fire with fire. I'm prepared to take whatever steps are necessary to close the Gillis site, etc.
Well, look, that telephone call was made 3 months ago. I mean, I don't know what I'm actually supposed to have said. I know between the mild and the bitter what the conversation was about. It wasn't about planting bombs.
What about the stranger you talked to in Liverpool? Will you tell the jury why you refused to identify him?
Well, simply, if I did, he'd be hauled over the cause the same as me. And he's not guilty like the rest of us. That's if it's a crime to discuss over the phone how to put pressure on the employer. But I will tell you that he's a trade union militant. And for the record, too, he's not an Irishman. Not that I've got anything against that. But he's a Liverpool fella, born and bred like myself.
And how close was this man Scott to the committee?
Oh, I mean, very close. He was a member of it.
What, a leading light?
Well, I mean, anything wanted doing, leaflets, picketing, he had the war paint on, ready to go. He's the first out.
And you never suspected that he was a paid informer?
Never, not a clue. I brought him home and give him his grub. I give him a couple of bob from time to time. The lads thought he was out of work. My missus used to treat him like a little lad. She used to cut sandwiches up for me to take back for his lodge.
And
he never bought any rations.
But did any of your colleagues suspect him as an informer?
No. Not a clue.
Mr. Malloy...
My lad, certain new evidence has come to hand which could well affect the course of this trial. Might I suggest that perhaps we could adjourn while my learned friend and I discuss its implications?
You consider it to be so imperative and vital?
I do, my lad.
Well, Mr. Kelly, how long will it take?
Oh, not long, my lad. 10 or 15 minutes at the most.
Then I will adjourn for 30 minutes, which should give counsel time to be long-winded and the jury time to relax and perhaps have a little refreshment. But remember what I told you before. You must not discuss this case with anyone outside this court.
Acting upon information received, the police today visited a yard in Lodge Street, rented by Malloy.
And?
They found explosives, along with a timing device similar to the one used in the bombing. Tests show that this device holds his fingerprint. You read it for yourself.
Oh, looks as if we should get our game squashing after all, Patrick.
I think that settles it, don't you? In the circumstances?
Come on, we're going to speak to Malloy.
Oh, he is.
What do you know about that?
It's impossible. He couldn't have done.
Why didn't you tell us about it?
There's none to tell. It's all nonsense.
Well, how did your prints get there?
I don't know.
Mr. Malloy, if they're your prints, then you must have put them
Look,
there.
honest to God, Mr. Griffiths.
Now, listen.
Look, apart from anything else, I wouldn't be as daft.
Listen, it's not too late to plead guilty if you want to. Now, mitigation is a defence.
Look, I'm not having that. If they're prepared to pull a stroke like this, well, OK, let them get on with it. But as far as I'm concerned, they can lock me up and throw away the key because I'm not pleading guilty to something I've never done.
I'm only half convinced, Malloy.
Nevertheless, it's the truth.
Not a lot we can do about it now.
I have to get a full adjournment.
Yeah, now listen. I don't defend violence, even against property. Now, don't mess me about. I'll ask you one more time, did you plant that bomb?
No.
And you don't know anything about this timing device and explosives with your prints on?
Absolutely nothing. I haven't got a clue what they're talking about.
Right.
The jury in this case is composed of members of the general public. The Queen against Malloy will be concluded tomorrow in the Crown Court. Peter Malloy, an unemployed building worker and leader of a rank-and-file action committee, faces charges of conspiracy to intimidate men to stop work, fighting and causing an affray, and conspiring with a person or persons unknown to cause an explosion. He's pleaded not guilty. Acting upon information received, the police yesterday discovered in a yard rented by the accused an explosive timing device holding his fingerprints.
In this yard in Lodge Street, the police have found explosives and a timing device with your fingerprints on them. Now, how do you account for that?
I don't know. I can't account for them, can I? I mean, I've never seen handler touch any explosives on any devices. It's a frame-up.
But the yard is rented in your name.
Yeah, but I mean, the police have been over that yard about 10 times with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, why didn't he find it then?
Well, does anybody else have a key for it?
Well, I mean, I've been inside since December. I mean, if you want to get in the yard, all you got to do is climb over the gate.
What are you suggesting, Mr. Malloy?
Well, I'm suggesting I've been fitted up. I mean, what other reason can I think?
You mean you've been framed?
Yeah.
Who by?
Well, the police. Or the cloak and dagger merchants who supply the phony information. I mean, Scott ain't qualified.
Thank you, Mr. Malloy.
There are so many loopholes in your story, Mr. Malloy, that I hardly know where to begin. However, let's start with the two policemen who saw your van leaving the site on the night of the explosion.
Impossible.
But they identified your vehicle.
No, they didn't. He couldn't have done.
And what about the mud found on the wheels of your vehicle and on your shoes?
Well, I mean, that's simple. I mean, that van of mine has been on more building sites than soft mick. I mean, I ferried the men from site to site. And as far as my shoes go, I've only got one pair, so there's bound to be all kinds of mud on them.
I believe you served on bomb disposal during the war.
Yeah, I was a sergeant.
A sergeant? You must have been very young to be a sergeant. And you are an expert with explosives.
Was.
Still are.
Nonsense.
As a matter of fact, you have an obsession with explosives.
Nonsense. I haven't even seen a detonator since 1946.
Really? Yet only 5 nights before this explosion occurred, you demonstrated to Mr. Scott, by means of a diagram, just how simple it would be to construct a bomb.
Yeah, but...
Do you deny that?
No.
And do you deny that you had, in fact, already constructed this bomb that you intended to use, and in fact did use on December the 4th?
Certainly I deny it.
You looked upon Mr. Scott as a comrade, and this diagram you drew was intended to impress him with your skill, with your technical ability, and your revolutionary fervour. Your sick, warped mind couldn't resist bragging about your other accomplishments.
This only come up because we were discussing the IRA bombing campaign.
Oh, really?
Well, that's what led up to it.
Well, now, Mr. Malloy, now that you've brought the subject up, I'm sure the jury would be very interested in hearing your opinion about an illegal organisation whose methods are, shall we say, very similar to your own.
You mean the IRA?
Yes.
Well, politically, I support the Irish people in the fight for home rule and independence. But I don't hold with the bombing. I think that anyone that puts a bomb in a public house or where there's innocent people gathered must be raving lunatics.
But you'd have no such scruples about damaging property, would you, Mr. Malloy? Like the Gillis site, for example.
I told you I'm against terrorism. Not because of any respect for property, but because I don't think that that would solve the problem. I mean, if it was as simple as that, all you'd have to do is go to Parliament, the talking shop, get in the gallery and throw a bomb down onto the floor. But that wouldn't be the end of it. I mean, change in society is a deep political question. And all my life, I've tried to get people to come along to study and to agree with them ideas.
Oh, yes, as we've heard in evidence, that includes threatening and physically assaulting those who prefer not accept your ideas.
I denied it.
But of course you do, Mr. Malloy. You deny everything.
You well-bred bastard.
I beg your pardon?
Nothing.
Now, what about this mysterious, generous political sympathizer who offered to fund your organisation? Who was he? Was he British? Was he even Western European? Well, Mr. Malloy?
The defendant must answer the question.
Well, I can't. I don't want to give his name.
Why not? Are you afraid it will discredit you further? Or perhaps establish links between you and some politically subversive organisation?
Not at all. You're well off the beam. I mean, all I can tell you, he's a fella like me. He's not a member of any organisation. I mean, he was a militant and he come into a couple of bob. If he wants to come forward on his own bat and tell you he was, fair enough. But I'm not going to give you his name on a plate to be persecuted by the press.
Well, a jury may find your loyalty very touching, but I'm sure they're smart enough to recognise a liar when they see one.
And a hypocrite.
Mr. Malloy.
Well, I don't have to stand for all this rubbish, do I?
Mr. Malloy, you are expected to answer the questions. If you refuse to do so, the jury is entitled to draw its own conclusions.
The transcript of your telephone conversation with this person you refused to identify in Liverpool. What does it say now? The stuff is available and waiting. What stuff, Mr. Malloy?
Leaflets. Leaflets, just how to take certain sites over, that's
Rubbish.
all. I'm telling you.
And I'm telling you that the stuff referred to here is the plastic explosive you acquired and later used on the Gillis site.
No.
What else does it say now? Maybe we've been too soft with them. They've cottoned on to the picketing lark, and that's played out now. So we have to come up with something that'll make them sit up and take notice.
Look, the way the police have laced that, it could be made to mean anything.
All right, Mr. Malloy, let's forget about the transcript. Let's forget it. What about your fingerprints? Found on the timing device. How do you explain that?
That's only before they were planted.
Everybody's lying except you, huh? The witnesses who saw you commit violence on the site. The 2 policemen who positively identified your van leaving that site on the night of the explosion. Mr. Scott, who had the unenviable task of working alongside you in order to gain information. The special branch officer who described what went on at your meeting. And now you claim that the police, or Mr. Scott, planted your fingerprints upon this timing device, which the police found in your yard, along with a quantity of explosives. Really, Mr. Malloy, what kind of people do you think we are?
I'm just being educated.
You may go back to the dock.
I called Colonel Jackson. If McNeil doesn't get here quick, we're in shit street.
Yes, I better call his home, I suppose.
I don't care what you do, but for Christ's sake, get him here.
What is your religion?
Church of England.
Take the book in your right hand and read what is on the card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Now, you're Mr. Jackson of Willow Farm, Petersfield, Hampshire. I'm sorry. Colonel Jackson.
Yes.
And you're the leader of an organisation which calls itself OMS, which I believe stands for the Organisation for the Maintenance of Supplies.
That is correct.
A title you borrowed from a similar strike-breaking force used in 1926.
Well, I must object. Nowhere in the aims of this organisation is there any reference to it being used as a strike-breaking force.
Nevertheless, Mr. Kelly, an organisation like that did exist in 1926 and was used during the general strike. Therefore, if Colonel Jackson decides to use the same name as that organisation, it's not surprising that Mr. Griffith ascribes to it the same motives and objectives.
Thank you, my lord. Now, Colonel Jackson, would you please tell the court exactly what OMS stands for?
In theoretical terms, loyalty to the Queen and her Parliament. And in practical terms, we are ready to offer our service to whatever government is in power during an emergency.
Like another general strike, for example?
Yes.
I see.
If I might just interrupt you for a moment.
Please do, Colonel.
We represent in OMS all classes and shades of opinion.
Oh, jolly good. Now, why did you employ Scott to inform upon that Workers' Action Committee?
Because, in our opinion...
Our opinion?
Yes, the committee's opinion.
Which, apart from yourself, includes several retired Army and Naval officers and 1 or 2 prominent businessmen.
As well as an ex-trade union leader.
Do you mean Lord Goodwin?
A splendid fellow.
A real smasher.
Colonel Jackson, go on.
Well, that's about it. We are a responsible body, loyal to the Queen, ready to defend our country in time of need.
Now, I have here a monthly journal, which I believe you set out.
Yes, that is correct.
Pretty impressive-looking publication. Looks rather expensive. I notice on page 3 there's rather an extensive breakdown of labour and trade union activities.
It's a service we offer our readers.
Of course, Colonel, one mustn't muzzle the ox that treadeth out the golden corn, eh?
I beg your pardon?
Well, who pays for all this?
Oh, our subscribers and members.
I thought you said the subscriptions were free.
Well, yes, it is, but by subscribers I really meant those who are on our mailing list.
Which includes several prominent businessmen who, for some reason or another, contribute to your journal.
Yes.
And whose names are never revealed.
These chaps are public figures, and it could be embarrassing and rather delicate.
Not to say incriminating.
Well, I must object to the way the Defence Counsel is making this sound all rather sinister. What he is deliberately failing to point out is that since the introduction of the Company Act 1967, all companies are required by law to submit in their annual reports all political donations in excess of £50.
My friend here is quite correct. The whole business is entirely legitimate and legal. However, Unlike the defendant, Colonel Jackson doesn't have to scrape around for pennies to publicate a news sheet. And workers seldom, if ever, read company reports, which in this case is a pity, because if they did, they would notice that the Gillies Construction Company donated £8,870 to this man's organisation.
Public knowledge.
Which in turn employed the said informer Scott to monitor, I think the word is, the actions of this workers' committee.
John McNeil.
Well, Jack.
He's a fingerprint expert.
Oh, good God.
Ex-Scotland Yard.
A devil of Griffiths up doing that.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Now, you're Mr. John McNeil of 10 Broomfield Crescent, London, is that correct?
Yes.
And before your retirement, you were employed as a fingerprint expert at New Scotland Yard?
Yes.
And how long were you there?
27 years. I retired 8 months ago.
Therefore, Mr. McNeil, there would be very little that you don't know about that particular craft. You are, in fact, an expert on fingerprints.
The witness will please answer yes or no.
Yes.
Now, like most people, I've always believed that fingerprint evidence was infallible. And if, for example, I touched an object and my prints were on it, there could be no doubt that only I had actually touched that object. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, that was the theory.
It was.
Up until 5 years ago, 1970, when the police introduced a new time-saving method which made it unnecessary for them to lug great objects back to Scotland Yard for photographing. All they had to do was to take a piece of tape, place it on the print, hey presto, the print was lifted. Now, that is the procedure, is it not, Mr. McNeil?
Yes.
So, now, for the benefit of the jury and myself, who I'm sure are as amazed at all this as I am, I wonder if you could explain, in simple layman's terms, exactly how this is all done. Would you do that, Mr. McNeil?
Well, it involves lifting a print. That's done by placing a piece of adhesive tape over the print and simply peeling it off.
And then the print's transferred onto the perspex, onto the tape?
Yes.
And then what?
It's then attached to some perspex and photographed.
I see. So if it's possible to lift a print with the tape, put it onto the perspex, then surely it's possible to move a print from one object to another. Is that correct?
Yes.
I find that rather fascinating, Mr. McNeil, because, in fact, what you're saying is that fingerprint evidence is no longer irrefutable. I wonder if you'd be prepared to demonstrate this technique here in the court. Would you be prepared to, Mr. McNeil?
Are you trying to prove that in this case there may have been a fraudulent transfer of fingerprints, Mr. Griffiths?
My lord, I'm merely trying to attempt to prove what is now scientifically possible. I think it's to the jury's advantage, and certainly my clients', if we have a demonstration of this technique here in court.
Well, I must object on the grounds that it would not be in the public interest to divulge this kind of information in an open court.
Yes, I agree with you, Mr. Kelly. And if Mr. Griffiths insists, then there's very little I can do about it.
Thank you, my lord. Now, Mr. McNeil, would you be prepared to help me in this demonstration?
Mm-hmm. Seems I have no choice.
Thank you. Excuse me a minute. Now, let's assume that this paperweight is a timing device or a bomb. Now, I'm a person with no understanding or specialized knowledge of fingerprints, but I will attempt to transplant a print onto this paperweight from some innocent object here in the court. I'm sure Mr. Kelly won't mind if he helps us in this little demonstration. Thank you. Now, we can be quite sure that Mr. Kelly's prints are, in fact, on that glass.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the tape. Now, would you point out exactly where those prints are on the glass?
There.
Right. Now, the old police method would be to cover that bit with powder, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I shall attempt the impossible and try and transfer Mr. Kelly's prints from the glass and onto our bomb. Now, Mr. McNeil, examine that and please tell the court, has the transplant been successful?
Yes, the paperweight now holds the prints which have been taken from the glass.
Now, as a fingerprint expert, Mr. McNeil, would you accept that as forensic evidence?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. McNeil.
Kelly, do you wish to question this witness?
Thank you, my lord. Mr. McNeil.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffiths. Mr. McNeil, in your expert opinion, would the police fabricate such evidence?
Certainly not.
My lord, that is a most improper question. It's up for the jury to decide whether the police have fabricated evidence.
You know better than that, Mr. Kelly. The jury will ignore that question.
I apologize, my lord. I have no further questions.
Very well, you may stand down, Mr. McNeil. Now, no one denies the right of people to try and change society. Indeed, the law guarantees each one of us that right. But it can only be done within the framework of the law. Now, in our society, people are permitted to preach the theory of social revolution. That is their right. But as I say, it must be done within the law. No one is permitted to break the law in order to impose his beliefs on others by force. Now, what you have to decide, members of the jury, is whether the defendant, Peter Malloy, ignored the rules and substituted his own methods in order to achieve social change, which, if found proven, you may well think amount to nothing more nor less than the law of the jungle. Now, I want you to remember, and I appreciate how very difficult this will be for you, but I want you to remember that the defendant is not on trial here for his political convictions. And likewise, you should not disregard Mr. Scott's evidence merely because he happened to work for OMS. Of course, what weight you attach to his evidence, well, that is a matter for you. You must judge Mr. Malloy, the defendant, solely upon the evidence and decide whether he is guilty or not guilty of the charges brought against him. Now, let me turn to the charge of affray. An affray is the fighting of two or more persons to the terror of Her Majesty's subjects. The prosecution must prove that the defendant fought with another person and that that fight was of such a nature as might well intimidate or frighten reasonable people. When you come to consider the charge of causing an explosion of a nature likely to endanger life or cause serious injury to property, you must consider the evidence separately from each of the others. And you have, of course, first of all to be satisfied that it was the defendant who planted the explosive substance. But remember, with regard to whether or not it's possible to transfer fingerprints from one object to another, well, Mr. Griffiths very cleverly demonstrated that it is. I mean, you saw it happen here in this court. But what does that prove? A sensational revelation, no doubt. But there is no shred of evidence that that is what happened in this case. Of course, Mr. Griffiths had every right to do that demonstration, and I uphold it. And he has every right to present his client's case in the way that he thinks best. And this he did. But it is for you to decide what weight you attach to that demonstration and to what was said by the defendant. And no doubt you will consider in that context and in the light of other evidence the slur that was cast upon those who procured the alleged faked evidence presumably either Mr. Scott or the police themselves. Now, before you retire to consider your verdict, let me impress upon you that it is for the prosecution to prove their case beyond reasonable doubt. No burden of proof rests upon the defense. So if you are not entirely satisfied that on each of the charges he is guilty, then you have no alternative but to acquit him. Now, you must remember that you must treat each of these charges separately. And one last word, you must try to reach a unanimous verdict. That means that you must each one agree with the other. Very well, will you now retire to consider your verdict?
Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? I'll just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
On the first count, do you find the defendant, Peter Malloy, guilty or not guilty on the charge of intimidation?
Not guilty.
On the second count, do you find the defendant, Peter Malloy, guilty or not guilty on the charge of causing an affray?
Not guilty.
On the third count, do you find the defendant, Peter Malloy, guilty or not guilty on the charge of causing an explosion?
Not guilty.
Peter Malloy, you are free to go.
Be upstanding in court.
Well, did he? I didn't think we had a cat in hell's chance.
Well, that was a turn over the booth. I really thought we were going to eat some porridge. Here's to the next time.
There won't be a next time, Malloy.
I'm only joking.
Listen, I wouldn't touch you again with a bleeding barge pole.
What's to do with him? We won, didn't we?
The jury in this case was composed of members of the general public. Our cameras will return to bring you another leading case in the Crown Court.